All right, welcome back, everybody, to another Opposite of Cheating podcast episode. This is episode 32, and we just started back in, I don't know, April of this year, 2025, and today is September 12th, 2025. So we've been very, very busy. I'm excited to bring on today a longtime colleague of mine from the International Center for Academic Integrity. That's how we met. He's not from the International Center, but we have both been active members in it for a long time. Actually, I'm going to get Joseph to tell us how long because I've forgotten. And yeah, we've known each other for a long time, and I just wanted to get him in here because he's a thoughtful observer of what's going on in higher education, what's going on with teaching, learning, and assessing with integrity. And so, welcome, Joseph.
Hey, thank you so much, Tricia. So glad to be here.
Yeah, so tell the folks a little bit more about you, who you are, what do you do, and in what context do you do it?
Sure. So I'm the director of the Academic Integrity Program at Colorado State University, and I've held this position since May of 2016. So
Okay.
we've known each other about since that time. We
Okay.
were trying to get connected with ICAI by the time that I came on board.
Yeah.
So about 9 years now. And so
Okay.
that position is located in the Institute for Learning and Teaching on our campus, which is like your standard CTL. So if you're
Yeah.
kind of, know the kind of cluster of how higher ed organizations form, we're like your traditional CTL. We do faculty development. We have some tutoring services and some instructional design, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And so the Academic Integrity Program has been part of the Institute for Learning and Teaching since its inception. So it's been
Okay.
kind of a long-standing program.
Yeah. And that's not common in the United States. And so are you guys an honor code school? Does your office do both the management of cases and academic integrity or?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're technically a modified honor code system institution, which is pretty consistent with like large state universities. We're a land grant institution.
Okay.
And so we have hallmarks of all of the things that are involved with a modified, right? So we have an honor statement that students complete every year, but we also, it's a primarily an administrative led process.
Okay.
And in terms of how my position operates across the university, let me just say reorgs are fun. So for the first 4 years, I was like half time in our Institute for Learning and Teaching and half time in our student conduct office.
Okay.
And so that gave me a really interesting lens on really all facets of this kind of work that we do. And then
Hmm.
2020, we had a reorg, and they said, well, actually, we kind of want you more over in the Institute for Learning and Teaching and doing kind of more, advising senior leadership, thinking theoretically about like how we're doing this, being more involved in ICAI and kind of these larger conversations. And that worked out perfectly because it was just
Okay.
in time for the pandemic. And we had such a huge lift from a kind of like, faculty support
Yeah.
component. So, and then that led naturally into the check thing and all of that stuff. And then naturally into the AI thing. So it's actually worked
Uh-huh.
out really well. Doing the cases for 4 years was fascinating work.
Yeah.
It is not where I came from. I'm originally an English professor. I have a
Yeah.
PhD in English and worked at a state college in Georgia but prior to coming to Colorado State University. So my lens is really a faculty lens,
Mhm.
and that teaching and learning component of it really speaks to kind of how I understand the work that we do.
Yeah.
But spending time in a conduct office was fascinating because it was like, you're there, you're doing the hearings, you're listening to the
Yeah.
stories. Students are telling you about their experience, and I think it
Yeah.
really humanizes all of it.
It does. I learned so much from doing resolution meetings from students. So, yeah, my office does both, right? We do the case management and the preventative education, the after education, the faculty development. We try and do it all. And I really do think one thing informs the other, that I have different stories to tell, different pieces of evidence. It informs my thinking differently meeting with students. Than if I didn't, I think. And so um, I really enjoy that. Even though today it does require a lot of code switching. So I had a resolution meeting this morning, then I had to go do a presentation, for our MBA students, and now I'm here talking to you. So it does require a lot of, yeah, code switching, if I could say that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've experienced that as well. I think that's very real. And I think it's
Yeah.
also really healthy for us. I mean, I think there are
Yeah.
few people on campus who can be as versatile because of those different spaces that you find yourself in because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So how? did you end up moving from being a English professor? I don't know this story actually, Joseph. How
Yeah.
did you move from being an English professor in Georgia to in charge of academic integrity in Colorado?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So it's a fun story. So I guess about 2 years before this happened, I was involved in a governor's teaching program, fellowship program in the state of Georgia.
Okay.
And the idea of that was like essentially, let's get, faculty from across the system together and let's talk about how technology is affecting,
Hmm.
what we do. And it's a long running program, really great, very, very heavy on SOTL kind of stuff, scholarship of teaching and
Yeah,
learning. And
great.
it was really that was my first time really thinking about, oh, well, what if I did something different than just teach English, right? And do the
Mm,
life of a faculty member? What would that look like? And I got really interested in centers for teaching and learning. And so, when I was kind of investigating what my next career
mm,
step might look like, I was primarily looking at centers for teaching and learning. And then when I remember it was a New Year's Eve, and my wife and I joke about this that if she had not fallen asleep on the couch, maybe I don't apply to that job because we were waiting for the ball
uh-huh.
to drop on New Year's Eve. And I remember seeing the job open here, and I thought it was on academic integrity, which was definitely something I felt like I knew something about having.
As an English professor, yes.
Exactly. With a very heavy comp load. Composition was a big part of it. And
Yeah.
so first and second year writing, you see a lot. And so I thought, well, I have something to offer in that area. At least I think so. And so then we just, the application process began
Awesome.
and then everything kind of played out. And I think it worked out really well because I think they were looking for someone who had that faculty lens, but also
Hmm.
was had a connection still to students and did not really mind the component of just being in the hearing
Yeah.
space and interacting with them. So
Yeah.
I think it matched really nicely with some of my, I would say some of my abilities and just the things I
Yeah.
enjoy to do professionally.
That's awesome. I just love talking to people about their stories to into academic integrity because it's not like any of us grew up thinking, I want to be in charge of academic integrity at a
Exactly.
university. So it's usually serendipity. So speaking of academic integrity, the question we ask everybody is tell us about your first memory of encountering that as an idea, as a thing. What was
Yeah, I love this
yours?
question. I have to admit I don't remember like my very first way of conceiving of it. But I have this
Yeah.
really powerful memory when I was a grad student of the moment that I realized it was much more complicated than I thought.
Mm,
And I was attending a disciplinary conference. I think it was the Rocky Mountain Modern Language Association in Tucson. And I was having lunch with a grad student who I believe was from New Zealand.
mm,
And he was talking to me about his preparation. And we were just having lunch. And he said, I think it's really fascinating the emphasis that Americans place on academic integrity. He said, like, if an idea is great, should it be shared? And I thought that was such an interesting idea because I realized we were coming at it from very different ideas of what sharing would look like,
mm.
and I thought that's interesting. That's a very different paradigm. And
And he
that was
meant
the
sharing without attribution.
Yes, right. And I think I was like, oh, okay, yeah, but we do agree, that
Yeah.
it should be shared. We just think that people should get credit for their work.
Yeah.
That's a very like, I don't know, like a very Western, but like very
Intellectual property thing. Yeah.
exactly right. A nation of lawyers, right? We're gonna hash that out. So that was
Hmm.
the moment where I thought there are definitely different paradigms across the world.
Mm,
And those inform how we see this issue. And it got complicated for me at that point. And I think it was a
hmm.
good moment to do it because I was in graduate school and I thought if you're going to approach a concept in a complex way, that's the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's complex. And yet to me, and maybe this is my Western worldview, it just feels so simple. Like I say to students all the time. So when you're talking to someone and you say, hey, I saw this show on Netflix, that's
Hmm.
a citation. That's a
Yes,
reference. Right. And so
absolutely.
I guess I just don't see why it's so complicated and why we would. I'm trying to think of a time where I would just basically not think that I should give a shout out to the person I got an idea from, but that's how that's the culture in which I was raised, so it's hard to see it any other way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think what caused me to pause in that situation was that I felt really strongly like this wasn't hard. And I
Yeah.
thought, but someone else sees it differently. And I think
Yeah.
that was like a, oh, okay, something's really different where this person did their education. Um, and at the same time, I agree with you. Like I was just talking with my son about some of the potential postseason moves that our baseball team might make.
Yeah.
And I was talking about an article I read where I was explaining it to him, and I said I was making sure I was attributing it to the correct person who came up with that idea. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, Bowman says this, but
Yeah.
O'Brien said that. And in these small ways, I think we really enculturate that value.
Mm,
And so I guess my takeaway is that's not necessarily a global thing. It's
yeah.
like I heard this idea or this is an idea, the idea
Yeah.
stands on its own.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of brings us to the age of AI, doesn't it? Because the tools we're using, took intellectual property off the internet without paying for it, used it to build their models. Sometimes now cites properly, sometimes doesn't. Um, so I'm wondering now if you talk to that same student, now I'm not saying that same student that many years later, but take that same student and plop them into 2025, what they would say about AI, they'd be like, I think it's fine, I guess, that happened. I don't know. Um,
Right.
but you're probably having these conversations on your campus. What you work a lot with faculty. What's going on? What are you noticing? We're almost 3 years later, right? November 2022, when ChatGPT 3 was released. So
Yeah.
what are you noticing? You're in your third week of your semester.
Yeah, I think that what I'm seeing a lot of are the impacts of disruption just over the course of years. When we managed the pandemic, for example,
Yeah.
we had some sense that there would be an endpoint in sight, right? It would
Yeah.
that the endpoint might look different than what we thought, but
And
that things
manage
would
might be a strong word.
right.
When we reacted to the pandemic,
Oh
yes.
yeah,
Okay.
right, exactly. Well, I mean, I think that's a great word. I think we're still in a reactive mode.
Yeah.
And I think across sectors of our society, I mean, you look at, from regulation to legislation, um, you know, and in higher education, I think it's been really fascinating because we've been constantly forced into a dynamic where we don't really control
Mm,
how this affects our day-to-day business. And so
yeah.
it's just like a random Tuesday might be the day that a new version drops and suddenly everything is upside down again.
Right.
And I think that what we're seeing, I'm really interested lately in like how, for example, the way that industry does work is affecting how we do work and maybe changing it. So, higher education is very deliberative, like basically to a fault, like we hardly get things done on like an
Yeah.
institutional level. And yet we're really kind of having that calendar dictated to us by these other entities who now are like, was like, well, you have to adapt now. You have to, have a policy quickly
You have no
to
choice.
address that. Right, exactly. So
Yeah.
that means a couple things. Number one, it
Yeah.
means just exhaustion. I think that's one of the things I hear most from our faculty of just like I am trying so hard at my job. I really care about these students and their learning. And I've been trying now for almost 3 years
Yeah.
to adjust. And I'm getting to the point where I don't know if I can keep this up. And I think that's very real. And that's primarily coming from, our faculty who were trying to, make some common sense adjustments along the way. They weren't
Yeah.
necessarily saying, hey, it's banned or I'm totally embracing this or anything like that. They were just, I live in the world. I have to accept that I don't control this.
Hmm.
I'm also, one of the things I think is kind of an interesting thing that we're observing across not just at this institution, but others, is that we're seeing these kind of intersecting trajectories. So on one
Yeah.
hand, we have those who tried to ban it from their courses altogether. And at this point, they are exhausted because
Yeah.
just the rapid pace of change, they're coming to the realization that that's probably not a likely thing that they're going to accomplish.
Hmm.
And so those people are coming to me in conversations and saying, okay, I want to make peace with this. Help me figure out how, right? And then, what I'm also hearing are the early adopters, right? Who early on said, okay, this is a new way we're going to do work. This is intellectual work. We're going to try to embrace it. It's going to be really messy.
Mm,
And we're going to see where it ends up. And then now, 3 years later, they're looking at what used to be their course, and they're
yeah.
looking at the student learning outcomes, and they're like, I don't
Mm,
know this is good. And
mm,
so, what do I do to come back from that? And so, their exhaustion's really different. And I
yeah.
think that we're maybe intersecting somewhere, and that may be a point of reckoning of where that's where typically, historically, we've had the need for like regulation and policy making, and we're not in an environment where that's happening. So I think people are a little bit worried.
Yeah, I'm getting the same sense too from our faculty. And also I feel it myself. Do you think, what do you, I'm wondering, you said both the early adopters and the initial early banners are exhausted for different reasons, right? But the same reason that their approaches don't seem to be working, no matter, or they have to keep changing or they have to keep adapting because of the new models that come out.
Right.
Do you think it's because both people in both camps, and I'm not blaming them, we can talk about the structural and systemic factors that are causing this. Do you think that exhaustion is in both camps is coming from the same place, which is majority of us are trying to layer on 21st century technology to 20th century models of teaching and assessing?
Oh, absolutely. I
Yeah.
think that's exactly what's occurring. I think we got to think about where our faculty come from, right? They're primarily coming from really traditional disciplinary based
Yeah.
programs. And that's not everybody, but like, we're talking about
Totally.
programs that exist on a set of traditions,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where, the coin of the realm is tenure, and tenure is achieved through a kind of publishing that really, I mean, like if we're being honest, is kind of obsolete. I mean,
Yeah. Well,
I say
especially
this as
now with
someone
all
who
the
earned
AI
tenure.
garbage going
Yeah.
into publishing. Yeah.
Oh gosh, I mean, I cannot even imagine right now what editors are having to deal with. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a nightmare. Um, and I guess so that we have to look at how we're incentivizing like that
Mm-hmm.
entire structure. But I'm not the person who thinks like we should, do drastic changes. I just think it explains what we get, what we get, what we have right now. I also think that, we are in the messy middle of all of this. And this is going to be a really long window for us. And there was this great frontline documentary years ago about the impact of the internet on education. I used to show it to my Comp 1 students,
Mm,
and it had this great moment where it was talking about the book as a technology. And it noted that like at one time we had these tremendous memories, right? We could remember thousands of
yeah.
lines of verse. And the book comes along and obliterates that because we no longer need it. But what we
Yeah.
get, we're not able to see this for quite some time, but what we get is, this access to all of these new ideas and different
Mm-hmm.
information. And that window was like 100 years. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
living through it, you're probably thinking like, I don't really know how this book thing is going to work out for us.
Right.
But what do we do? And I think we're in the middle of this right now. We really don't know the end outcome, what those cognitive gains and losses really are going to be.
Yeah.
And so right now we naturally are going to focus on what's different. And those are primarily going to be losses. So you look at all the research that's coming out, the primary questions are what is it doing to critical thinking? What is it doing to
Mhm.
students' retention of information that they're supposed to get at the end of a course?
Yeah.
And those answers are typically not great right now.
Well, yeah. Well, and we don't know. Like, one study will show, oh, a loss of, some cognitive decline or loss of memory, right? The MIT study months later, the people who over relied on ChatGPT couldn't remember, anything about what they taught. And then you get other studies saying, look how great this tutor is. Students who use this tutor, learned much
Right.
more than students who didn't use the tutor. So, I
Right.
mean, to me, that's just a difference between narrow specifically trained AI, a thing trained to actually help students learn versus taking ChatGPT and just, this general purpose tool and just offloading to it. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that's where I am in this picture of I'm a hopeful pessimist. And, I'm hopeful about narrow specifically trained AI tools to help solve particular problems like
Yeah.
AlphaFold, great for folding proteins, great for science, amazing. Let's do more stuff like that, including in education. I'm pessimistic about these big LLMs, both because they're environmental reasons, their ethical concerns about how they were built and continue to be built, how much money they cost to run, and they're not. the way they were designed wasn't to help us learn. They were actually designed to stop learning,
Exactly.
to offload our thinking. So, like, where do you sit on that when it comes to thinking about you work with faculty, you're trying to figure this out? Like, are you guys doing anything to provide faculty with narrowly trained like tools? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, just to go back for a second, I mean, you raise a
Yeah,
great point about the methods that we train people to teach are going to have to adjust very quickly. And we look, in higher ed, what I'll say our advantage is for most part, people are really game for that. They're like, okay, that's not working. Let me try something different. And those are like the
good at
vanguard of
learning.
the whole thing. Yeah, I mean, you're always going to have the late adopters.
Yeah,
But I do think that like there is a scenario in which targeted uses of generative AI are going to be incredibly beneficial. We just
yeah.
kind of sort of can't, there's too much noise that rather than signal right now. And so we're kind of sifting through all of that to figure it out. And I think what we'll see generationally is a crop of educators who are more I don't know, more interested in these ideas of like not a thing that has to be kind of managed, but like
Mm,
how teaching is changing and
yeah.
evolving. So I think that's part of it. Right now we're just trying, I think we're acknowledging that there are going to be different phases of that process. So right now, most of our work at Tilt is what we call our CTL. It involves just making sure that we have a baseline competency across our faculty about what
Mm,
this is, how it works, how it might be impacting their courses, and how it
mhm.
might be impacting like the learning that students are doing. So in other words, it's like there's a lot of workshops about, just like what it is, what
Yeah.
has changed, that sort of thing. And then we have more narrowly focused kind of programming around, building custom GPTs and what that would look like for your course. We're partnering with parts of our university that have, laid out pretty significant investments in AI. So we have like,
Okay.
an AI specialist in our College of Veterinary Medicine who's doing some really
Mm,
interesting work for their college. And so we're partnering with them on these kind of more narrow focused topics,
mm,
specifically for the faculty who are way beyond,
yeah.
what is this and how does it work? And they're wanting to know, they're tackling some of the tougher questions right now, like what role should it have in feedback for students, right?
Mm.
That sort of thing. Or how can I build better courses with this as a thought partner? So they're a little further on. Then you have the research component where people are really interested in like how is this going to affect the research we're doing at the university? How can it help us kind of
Yeah.
transcend some of the current limitations of our research paradigm?
Just, I mean, we start out this conversation talking about how, kind of exhausted faculty are, and I'm just exhausted and overwhelmed by hearing hearing you talk about all the things we're trying to do. Like it's just there's a lot, right? And like you said, the companies keep changing the goalpost, and we keep thinking we're like a meter away from it, and then it's like, nope, we're 20 meters away from it. And I'm not a sports ball person, people, so I'm sorry if that analogy doesn't work.
That's totally
But
fine.
I should have used a hockey one probably. So, it's just exhausting. But I wanted to kind of narrow in then on two different questions. One is faculty. Given that we still largely have institutions that are built on a 20th or sometimes 19th century model, like credit hours, um, and large class, industrial age, large classes of maybe two, three, four, five, 600 plus students. I don't know how big your biggest class is there. What are some, like, one or two things that you have advised faculty to do or you're seeing faculty do that they can just take some agency over this and feel like, you know,
Yeah.
I've done something.
Yeah, right. Right. No, I appreciate this question very much. I think that is primarily the thing they want to know right off the bat is like what next? What does
Yeah.
next look like? So, for me, number one, it's to encourage them conceptually to stop thinking of AI as an on and off button for their
Mm,
course. Like it's not going to be there or not be there. In many ways now, it's the way the internet infuses all parts of our lives, right?
yeah.
And I said, so my argument has been, I want them to start looking up like assessment scales and what
Yep.
that looks like. So in other words, these five different ways that you could be, what AI use could look like in your course. And then
Like
let's
Fru's
start
and Perkins AI assessment scale, stuff like
exactly.
that, you mean?
Yes,
We've
right.
already had Perkins and Fru's on
That's
our
all fantastic.
FERS, sorry, on our podcast. So good.
Wonderful. Okay. So, I love that because what that causes our faculty to do then is to look back at their course, right? And say, which parts of this are unchangeable? I cannot,
Yeah.
if I change that, it's not my course,
Yeah.
right? They're essential to that, what my course is about.
Yeah.
And which parts can I now say, are okay for co-authoring
Hmm.
or maybe just like intellectual work, studying,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like. And I think that feels healthy to me because it encourages our faculty to separate what they really need to fight over here,
Yeah.
right? Fight to keep,
Yeah.
right? And some things, just speaking honestly with them, I'm like, we're going to have to get better at letting some things go.
Yeah.
So in my field, what traditionally that has looked like is I've assigned a text and you
Hmm.
have to sit down. Like I'm assigning behavior. It's like go sit with this text for a couple of hours a
Yeah.
week and read every single word.
Yeah.
Well, in some courses now, that's going to be a thing. We're going to have to let go how they actually engage with the text, right?
Yeah.
It hurts my heart as an English
Yeah.
professor, but to know that like I can't be there to smack it out of their hand or to
Right.
give them a lecture or whatever. But like that reading might look really different now.
Mm.
But that's not where I'm going to really channel my energy. I'm going to channel my energy on, maybe the writing in the course,
Hmm.
right? And I'm going to think very carefully about how I want their critical thinking to translate and their ability to communicate through writing, right?
Yeah.
That might be really important to my course, but in other courses that might look really different. And so
Yeah.
getting people to separate out where things might belong is, I think, a core component of like that course design component we're going to need in the future.
Yes. And um, most of us in our PhD programs were not trained, we're not trained how to teach or create valid assessments like our K through 12 colleagues were.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, I would say it's it's time. It's time PhD programs, universities, please, please, please provide teacher training and assessment design training to our folks who want to go into being university and college professors. I think that's something the system and the institution. We had a great program about preparing future faculty program. It was national, not we. It was national. It was great, and I don't know what happened to it. But anyway,
Mhm.
so that's something I would
I
bank
agree
for the system to
completely.
change. So that all sounds good. I mean, and that's what I've been advising faculty too. And for example, you think about economics courses or finance in the business school. They had to learn R programming or Python or whatever to do something in economics.
Yes.
They weren't learning R to become computer programmers. They were learning it because it was a tool to get to an end. So that might be a great thing to offload to the LLMs, right? Is let the LLMs do the art, do the programming for you to get to the economic questions that you're trying to answer. So that's one example I give folks. And um, it's kind of an easy one, not being an economics professor, but it was a chance. Like I had to learn how to do in psych major, I had to learn how to do stats by hand, and then SPSS came along, right? And so you didn't have to learn how to do it by hand anymore. So I think
Yeah.
that's a good example. Having said that, like you said, these things are on all the time. They are integrated. They are very invasive. Like I tried to have a certain company's extension enabled on my Chrome so I could see how students were using it. And every time I tried to write something, it was telling me that my writing was bad and it wanted to change it, and I
Gosh,
had to turn it off because it was
absolutely.
way, way too invasive. I am tired of machines telling me what to think and do. But anyways, um, having said that, it's everywhere. So we're not just in the business of facilitating learning, we're in the business of certifying learning.
Mm.
So I think it's one thing to say, like, it's there, you got to figure out how to redesign, but what's the conversation been at your school about, okay, but when the rubber hits the road, how do we certify that this student has the knowledge and abilities that our degree is supposed to represent that they have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really complicated conversation, and I think institutions are struggling with that.
Yeah.
I think part of our conversation has been like, okay, where are the places that we can ensure authentic work, like authentic assessment is happening, right?
Hmm.
So, one of the things I've advocated for are in the courses that can do it. So not the really large, we're not talking the 200 person chemistry
Yeah.
class, but recapturing some of that class time for assessment, right? And
Yeah.
being like, we just, those are for now, that's what we're going to have
Yeah.
because it's the least bad option
Mm.
among, all of the menu of things, proctoring and whatnot, um, but I think this is one of those issues that's really struck at the core of how decentralized higher education is, because there isn't really one person to tell people what should happen here. So for every solid idea you have,
Right.
someone has objections, and they're really good ones, right? And to be clear, we are also in a bit of a bind because we have I say overinvested in those learning spaces that are not conducive to that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to take some time to work out.
Yeah.
I don't have, that is well above my pay grade.
Yeah.
But I think that what's the things that I'm most focused on is making sure that we're having these conversations on campus.
Hmm.
Because oddly enough, I think that there has been this thing that's occurred with AI where people just kind of hit overload. And they're
Yes.
just like, I don't know, maybe I'll retire early or something. I mean, something that dysfunctional is being said on a daily basis on most
Oh, yeah.
campuses. And so I think, helping people say, well, this is kind of an engineering problem, and we're going to have to work this.
Hmm.
But also we have to understand the problem is really important.
Mm.
So right now, just to give you an example, and I know
Yeah.
this is beyond the question, what I would say, we have been so focused on chats, right, lately, but now agents are here, and that is going to significantly change the game. And what we have figured out from talking with our faculty and really our most engaged employees, these, administrative professionals who focus on this area, is that conceptually we are really far off from understanding how
Yeah.
agentic AI is about to impact this space. So, helping people understand what kinds of questions we should be asking. So now when you suddenly have a an agent that can be easily trained based on all the course documents, all of basically a knowledge library of your course, right? That can automate work very easily for students, but also for the faculty teaching them.
Mhm.
What kind of guidelines are you giving any of these folks, right? And right now it's been radio silence. I mean,
Mhm.
across higher ed, I think we've all
Mhm.
struggled to share information on that with folks who are actually in the
Mhm.
courses. So I think that's the next big challenge of trying not to get too focused on the chats anymore and move on to something that is, I think, really it's gonna. My primary concern is that this is going to affect us, but it's going to be invisible. So the way it's going to play out is students are going to disappear from writing centers, and they're going to wonder why, you know, and in partial or tutoring centers, because I can now create an agent specifically designed for my
Personalized tutor.
course,
Hmm.
right? Or programming that's around assessment strategies and courses, or
Yeah.
because now I'm using an agent to provide feedback for my students. I
Yeah.
can do that very easily, right? So I think that those are, from a university standpoint, those are going to be trickier because they're going to be relatively invisible for us at first.
And yeah. Well, so there's the agents, but there's also all the wearables, the smart glasses, there's pendants that are not only, there's this bracelet that records all of us all of the time, without
Yeah.
our permission. And of course, you're talking about more in class assessments, but if I'm wearing smart glasses, um, those blue books aren't secure either.
Yeah, I know. It's odd. We haven't seen that so much on our campus. We've actually seen a return to more traditional methods of circumventing, like, these assessment strategies we're putting in place. So
Yeah.
we have a really large stats class, for example, where they've kind of gone back to more traditional methods of
Yeah.
assessment. And now we're starting to see things that we would have seen like 8 years ago, right? So,
Copying from a neighbor.
radios and people out,
Yeah.
kind of a traditional mode. So that's
Yeah.
maybe we're just campus specific on that, but
Or maybe faculty and TAs are just not seeing it.
it's entirely possible. Yeah.
Like if you got a class of 200, are you going to be able to really make sure all the glasses you're seeing aren't smart glasses?
Right.
Probably not. I think it's happening. I think it's just not being taught. Okay, on that depressing note. Okay, so what do we asked what faculty have agency to do. What should institutions be doing to support faculty? As I say, we keep asking faculty to rebuild the plane while they're flying it.
Right.
What should institutions be doing to support our faculty?
Yeah, I think the first question is, is their institutional response, is that appropriate to their stature as an institution and their
Yeah.
resources? So, for example, look, I get it. I worked at a small college. There's very little that you have in terms of resources to manage something
Yeah.
like this, but it needs to be proportional to like what your challenges are.
Hmm.
And I think there's a lot of like there isn't enough investment across higher ed for especially institutions who could do better. So I
Yeah.
think part of it is building capacity for how you're going to manage what is probably, if we're speaking frankly, I think the challenge of our career, like the
Yeah.
time that we live in.
And a seemingly never-ending challenge because it just
Absolutely. We're
keeps
going to hand
slightly morphing.
Exactly. I mean, so
Yeah.
so my background is so my area of publication was science fiction. So
Ah.
this really speaks to me. And one of the things that the metaphor that I use with folks is we're a generation starship, right? So we don't have the capacity to get to the next star system,
Yep.
like in Star Trek in just a
Yep.
few minutes. We're going to have to hand this off to another generation. And
Mm,
what our goal should be, not to solve it, because I don't think that's entirely right. I think that we need to establish principles, right, that guide us in the next steps we take. And then we
mm,
need to hand this thing off in good shape to the next generation of folks who are going to help manage this. And there's not going to be
yeah.
like a moment where that happens, but I think
Mm,
that's why we have to think carefully about how we proceed. So
mm,
the other thing that institutions can do is start really identifying the processes that they're going to use to make these decisions. Because right now it's very reactive. It's in many cases ad hoc. There's like not people in a position. I've become someone on our campus that talks about this issue because of the connection to academic integrity. But
hmm.
no one, this is not my job description. It's just because I'm interested in it.
Right.
And I think that sort of thing is happening all across higher
Yeah,
ed, just depending
absolutely.
on people's interest level and their capacity to deal with it. And I think we need, like in academic integrity, we need to make it someone's job,
Yeah.
and that will kind of create a more functional base for us for all the decision making. And I
Yeah.
think also because institutions in the West have this whole system of shared governance,
Mm,
we need to make sure that this is faculty led. As a former faculty member, one of the things I think that feels the worst is when you realize a decision was made by like IT and no
yeah.
one talked to you, right,
Yeah.
about how that was going to impact you. The previous place I worked for, they just got handed a LMS like the week before the semester started, and it caused so much stress,
Oh
right?
gosh.
And
Yeah.
that happened because that was when it was turned on, you know? And so I think if you really want people to be on board with the direction you're going, you have to make them part of that process and ask who's
Yes.
leading it.
That's basic change management, right? I mean, um, and to your point about passing it on to the next generation, and that includes students, not only listening to faculty and including them in the conversation, but listening to students. We can't just, they are using these tools, they are using them in ways that we might have no clue about how they're using them. And we just have to ask and we have to listen with open minds. And then that will help us provide them with guidance because survey after survey shows students want guidance. They want to be taught how to use these ethically and responsibly, majority of students. And and they're looking to us for guidance. And then we're looking back at them going, I think you probably know more about it than I do.
Right.
But they don't have the knowledge and the we're a bit more wise, hopefully, and a bit more experienced in life, and so we bring that to the table, and so together, I think we can make a really strong team if we go for that. So thank you so much, Joseph. Really appreciate your time. Pleasure to talk. Um, we look forward to sending this out for everybody to watch, and we'll talk soon.
Great. Thank you, Tricia, for having me on.